Hello, my name is Neen, and I'm going to speak about disaster and how a local community led by women was able to mitigate it through creative means. Disasters are a fact of life in the Philippines. I mean, sino ba dito ang hindi pa nakakaranas na mabaha? O sino ba ang hindi pa nakaranas ng earthquake? Safe naman sabihin na halos lahat tayo ay alam kung ano ang epekto ng sakuna o disaster sa mga Pilipino. Every year, we're peppered with the same news angle on how the Filipino people are so resilient when it comes to disaster. Although there have been many efforts from the Philippine government to shift the policy environment and the way the country deals with disasters from response to preparedness, we have yet to develop our full capacity in disaster management at the individual, organizational, and institutional levels. Disaster scholars assert that one reason for this is that most disaster programs are usually too technical and focuses more on scientific methods, engineering interventions, and the management of hazards by a body or entity external to the community. These types of strategies usually result in disaster management programs that are not grounded in the realities of poor populations, causing them to become more vulnerable. If we really want to have zero casualties and genuinely resilient communities, we have to localize disaster efforts, and we have to answer important questions like, what does disaster mean to the people we work with? Ano nga ba ang sakuna para sa maralita? And how do their notions and understanding of disaster, risk, and vulnerability affect the way they respond to and prepare for disaster? In my research on homes and disasters, I've realized that, indeed, different actors see and treat disasters as different types of events, so they prepare for and manage them in very different ways. Let me tell you the story of a disaster-prone community in Rizal. So this community is a relocation site situated near the Montalban and Wawa rivers and built on a floodplain. You may remember this community in TV reports back in 2012. Back then, pictures and videos of distressed families jumping on their rooftops, crying for help as the habagat or the monsoon rain sent floodwater crashing into their community. Of course, those families were traumatized, so they evacuated and never came back, leaving the housing units idle. Fast forward to 2016, the idle units have been occupied by a grassroots organization of renters and homeless families alike. At first, the local government unit in their area was not too keen on recognizing them as a legitimate organization. Siyempre, the LGU wanted to prevent them from living in a flood-prone and high-risk area. They warned the community. Ang sabi ng LGU, kung ano man ang mangyari sa kanila, ay hindi nila yon sagot. But the grassroots organization still insisted on staying. Since to them, syempre, being homeless while hundreds of housing units are left unoccupied and idle is a much bigger disaster. The community knew that floods will be an annual occurrence, so they give disaster preparation orientations annually to their member families even before typhoon season. Despite the initial lack of support, the community developed their own disaster mitigation plan grounded on their experiences and available resources. You see, in their community, mothers usually take charge as the men go to the city to work. Due to dispersion, theft, harassment, and eviction threats from various entities, they decided to organize a marshalling system to guard their communities from different forms of danger. So every night, mothers stand guard and enforce curfews in their assigned cluster areas. This brilliant patrol system is also activated during disasters. As soon as they hear news of an incoming typhoon, an ingenious process unfolds. Mothers start going around the community to alert the families, while some of them start monitoring the water level of the nearby river. As soon as the water reaches knee level, all cluster leaders mobilize the families to start evacuating. They make sure they turn off the main electric switch and padlock their homes to prevent fire and theft. On top of their priority list for evacuation are senior citizens, people with disabilities, and children. So during this evacuation, there are also marshals assigned to assist the families to get to evacuation areas through predetermined shallow routes. They even prepare bamboo trunks tied one after the other in case there are still people left behind. Marshals ride on makeshift rafts and go around the community to ensure everyone has evacuated. After the flood has subsided, the community then engages in bayanihan, or a community effort to clean, with some homes functioning as daycare for children so their mothers can join the cleanup activity. Their local disaster plan seems to work quite well. In 3 years, walang casualty. In fact, this year, during the monsoon rains, they successfully evacuated their community even before the assistance came. But theirs is a disaster management plan and paradigm that isn't quite the norm in this country. In fact, their notions and understanding of why disasters occur stands in contrast with the notion and understanding of the many disaster agencies. Despite a shared vocabulary on disaster risk reduction and management, the differing notions and experiences of reality on the ground makes for very different methods and responses between grassroots organizations and state institutions. Take their interpretation of what disasters are, for example. For the officials of the barangay, disasters are natural and unexpected events that result to a disruption of everyday activities. Para sa kanila, flooding occurs in their community because of the big volume of water and poor drainage systems. For the LGU, the ultimate goal is to have zero casualty, to efficiently assess losses and damages, and to go back to normal as soon as the disaster episode is through. But the community members have a different take. To them, disasters are not natural, but instead are primarily man-made. Para sa kanila, kung mas mahirap ka, edi mas vulnerable ka. They recognize that their social and economic vulnerability contributes to the heightened impact of disasters. The community members are quick to stress that the unit shouldn't have been built on a floodplain in the first place. Ang dahilan raw ng mga mas malalang pagbaha sa kanilang lugar ay ang quarrying at logging activities sa paligid nila, pati na rin ang pag-convert ng agricultural lands sa commercial or residential areas. Ultimately, to them, the goal is not just to have zero casualty after the disaster episode, but to solve the root causes of disaster and their vulnerability, which is poverty and the lack of social support. So, from this research, I have realized two important things. First, how we see disaster informs how we prepare and respond to it. If we see disasters as natural, then we risk overlooking the fact that disasters are a result of the interface of physical, cultural, and socio-political factors. If we believe that the goal of disaster recovery is just to go back to normal, then we reproduce the myth that the affected people were living secure, productive lives before the disaster. As disaster scholars have noted, yung approaches to disaster is not just affected by people's perceptions of disaster risks and hazards, but also of people's notions of the prevailing social order and their place in it. I really believe that yes, we should focus on disaster preparedness, but we also need to rethink the root causes of vulnerability, and we need to start doing something to address it. Second, we must realize that despite a shared vocabulary, notions and understandings of disaster vary greatly within and among communities. These multiple meanings attached to disaster language may be hidden to those engaged in the event. Therefore, just because 100% of community members have participated in floor or earthquake drills and seminars does not mean that the disaster management program has been successful, especially when they see and understand risk, hazards, and disasters differently. Nowadays, it is not enough to ask if all stakeholders are involved in a disaster response situation. Community consultation and participation is not the ultimate goal, nor does it guarantee the best approach to disaster risk reduction. Instead, the best way to ensure the effectiveness of disaster preparedness and management is to try to understand how the people make sense of disaster management, how they negotiate and conceptualize risks and hazards. We must begin to understand the underlying values and beliefs that motivate the response to disaster. Maybe they think disasters are caused by Mother Nature or God's wrath, or that disasters are some form of divine retribution. Or maybe they attribute their disaster management skills to diskarte and bayanihan instead of some fancy jargons and processes they learned in a workshop. Filipino anthropologists have asserted that people have their own ways of responding to calamities, and these have helped them survive many times in the past. Communities may already have mechanisms in place that could be further developed. Disaster risk reduction programs, then, would have to focus on developing social safety nets within the community and developing the capacity of its members. After all, disaster is a development issue. Thank you.